So hello again, we are into chapter number 1 of EIS and we have completed few topics. Let us try to revise as much as we can. We saw things related to business process automation. That is what the chapter is about, automated business processes, or you can term it as business process automation. So initially we tried to see what is a business process, which was already covered in other chapters like chapter number 2, where it would help an organization to achieve its specific goal. After that, we saw that there are 3 types of processes. Basically, an organization has 3 types of processes in general, and actually this chapter is like about automating these processes or including technology in these processes, but we don't need to get into that right now. It's just that we need to see some basic concepts of 3 processes. As in, the processes are divided into 3 categories. One is something which is known as operational, second is something which is known as supporting, and the third one is known as management processes. So operational, you are going to remember it with the help of awesome. Operational, supporting and management, where supporting and management do not actually provide the value directly to the customers, but are like support from the back, like we have our parents who support us from the back basically. So the result is going to come in your hands basically, and it would be your result, but there are other factors which actually help in order to get the result which we want. So those factors, a teacher might also be considered as a supporting process in this entire process. So operational process is something which provides value directly. Order to cash was an example. Supporting process is something which do not provide value directly, but it backs the core process or operational process. Human resource management was an example. Third is something which is known as management, where these people who belong to the management actually develop the strategy, the budget and everything. These are top level officials and they form the policies basically. So it definitely helps the operational process, because they have to follow the policies which have been made at the top, and if the policies are not proper, definitely the implementation is not going to be proper at all. So everything is like related, everything has its own importance, nothing can be replaced by one another, nothing of these are like alternatives of each other. So 3 types of processes our syllabus says. You need to remember the name and slide description as well. I hope you have made my summary as well. Okay, as in, please make it if you have not made it. These videos are not to be watched, or you don't need to move further if your handwritten content is not complete. Okay, it is of no use, to be very frank with you. EIS requires your own handwritten content. I can provide you the exact direction to go in which you would be able to make the content according to the examination and understand the content as well, but if you don't make it, then everything would come down to 0, to be very frank with you. I'm sorry. So please make the content in your notebook. So 3 types of processes. After that, we saw something known as objectives of business process automation. 4 objectives, easy to understand and smaller concept basically, can be a 2 marks question. Confidentiality, integrity, availability and timeliness, if you remember. Okay, the difference between availability and confidentiality, unauthorized access, integrity, unauthorized amendments, timeliness when asked for, and timeliness at the right time and availability when asked for are the 4 things you need to remember. Then we saw something known as benefits of VPA. Quality and consistency should be like Virat, or quality should be like Virat, if you remember. The first one was quality and consistency. Things would be identical, we would be able to perform consistently in a similar manner if we are doing it with the help of technology or machines, because they usually do not do mistakes. They are programmed, they are made in such a way that the calculations and everything would be like the previous thing, as in it would be perfect. So quality, we have something like visibility, everything would be within our reach, things would be seeable, you would be able to understand things live and make decisions at the real time if you're understanding. So Virat, we have something known as improved operational efficiency. Definitely less resources, less cost, less time. It is related to reduced cost as well. It is related to time saving as well. So these 3 objectives, or these 3 advantages are like related to each other. And we have something known as reduced turnaround time, the time required for the organization to answer would be reduced to a great extent. The response time, it is basically the right response time would be like, it is like milliseconds. If you go onto a website, the website's response between 0.01 second, if you understand. So that is like almost negligible. So it has increased to a great extent because of technology, if you're understanding. So these are some benefits of something known as BPA. Then we had an important question again, something known as how do we go about BPA. There are 8 points. First, define why we plan to implement BPA, the reasons. Basically, the problems in the current system is something which you are going to write. Errors in the current process, not able to find the documents quickly, not able to collect the cash quickly. Okay, the processes are not streamlined, everything resulting in poor customer service. Then definitely you need to change the way of working, because nothing is working in your way. Second is something which is known as understanding the rules, which would be the second step actually, because you need to know the legal aspects, whether they can be included in the new system as well. If it is not, then I don't think that is the right direction, because the things are going to become illegal. So it is rather keeping it slow is better rather than keeping it illegal. Third is something which is like document the process we wish to automate. You need to make a document of each and everything so that you get more clarity, which things are being captured, how the process is flowing. Usually you can draw a flow chart. That is what our syllabus also says. So documenting gives a clarity, and it also helps us to overcome some kind of errors, inefficiency or bottlenecks is something which is given as well. And that is something why we are going to make a document, okay, to get more idea about the problem is there, but to get more clarity, to get the source of the problem, to get the root of the problem. Fourth is something that you need to define the goals basically that your system is going to achieve. So you should know why you are spending amount, why you are spending so much time and efforts. You should know what are your basic expectations from that system, and while defining that goals, you should be smart, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and timely. Next is something which is known as calculating the ROI, or engaging the business process consultant, where you would be actually talking to the vendor. He should be capable enough to provide us the right solution. He should be experienced enough to be able to solve the problems, to include technology in our system, and to provide us a proper solution. So it is your responsibility to select the right vendor depending upon the reviews, depending upon his experience, depending upon the solution he provides. Okay, so next is something which is like calculating the ROI, so that we get an approval from the senior management in order to implement this BPA. In order to get the approval, you will have to talk in terms of cost savings and how you are going to generate more revenue. So you could talk about the space regained from paper, you could talk about the elimination of fines, you can talk about the collecting the cash faster, you can talk about the new customer revenue generation scheme, you can talk about the increase in the customer service level. So you could talk in those terms, you could talk in those monetary terms, and definitely it will get an approval. Once you get an approval, we assume over here that yes, we have gotten approval, hence we move towards something known as developing the BPA. And last is something which is known as testing, where testing is like before using it in a full-fledged manner, before using it for the organization's benefit, we just test it whether it is capable or not. Okay, this testing will increase the user adoption and reduce the resistance as well, because it should be perfect, if you're understanding. So testing is an important step. So after testing, the organization will start using it. So this is something which we have seen so far. Now the next thing which we are going to see, which is again an easy, sensible, but a bigger topic comparatively. The topics are now related, so try to pay attention. It is easy to understand, something which is, you ask a question, it is easy to understand but difficult to elaborate it. That is something what is going to happen. Let us try to get into the details of the topic which is there in the book exactly, and let us try to learn it, and let us try to make my summary of it as well. So the first thing which we are going to see, or the topic's name is something known as important from the examination's perspective, risks. According to you, what is a risk? Directly we are jumping onto the topic. Okay, nothing about other things or any other aspect, straightforward to the topic risks. Can you tell me what could be risk, or what could be the types of risks, or what is the term risk? What is the significance of the term risk? Where is it used usually? So I think you might have guessed it correctly. Risk is something, if it comes, it would be resulting in something bad. That is what our syllabus has to say. Actually, our syllabus also says that there are two types of risks. One is something which is considered to be positive, which can be considered as an opportunity risk as well. And second is something which is considered as a negative, which should be having a negative impact definitely. So we are going to talk about this. We are going to control this. We are going to measure this. We are going to respond to this appropriately depending upon the scenario. So this is something which we need to talk about. This is something which we need to discuss about, something known as risk. So what is a risk? Risk is any event, okay, which would result in a significant deviation, that is what our syllabus says, from the planned objective, which will have a negative consequence. Negative result is something which we are going to see, okay, which is definitely going to be unwanted negative consequence. That is what our syllabus says. So risk is something which is going to disturb your way of working. Risk is something which is going to drive you away from what you want to achieve. Risk is something which are the factors which are bad for your organization. So the risk is something which is to be stopped. Now just try to understand this. If I tell you that you are a risk manager of the organization, try to pay attention, okay, we are going to talk conceptually. You are the risk manager of an organization, and I tell you that you have to control the risks. You have to reduce the impact of the risks. You have to reduce the losses which are caused due to the risks. Now if I tell you this much, okay, and if I just go away, your responsibility would be to definitely do what I say. So what do you think would be the next step which you would start thinking from? So what could be the next step? So next step is, yes, I will try my best to control the risks, reduce the impact and everything, but let us understand what are the types of risks. There may be numerous amounts of risks in the market, but my organization may not be affected by each and every risk, if you're understanding. Depending upon the functioning of the organization, the risk may vary. Similarly, over here as well, you will have to think about the types of risks which could be there in the world or in general, and then whether any of these risks are applicable to my organization or not. And if they are applicable, then I would be determining what should be the control that I should apply so that they don't come, or I am able to reduce them, or I am able to ensure it, provide it, give the responsibility of it to a third party or something like that. So before we move towards the managing of risks, responding to the risks, we will have to understand as in what would be the types of risks which could be there. Our syllabus says there could be two major categories of risks. One could be something known as risks which could be there in BPA. Just try to listen. And second could be risks which could be there in organization or in case of business. So first is something which is related to automation. First is something which is related to technology. First is something which is related to system, computer, network. Okay. And second is something which could be there in business. So the BPA risks may, or just for your information, may or may not be there in all types of organizations. There may be some organizations which do not use technology. So BPA may not be there. But business risks is something which would be there in BPA oriented organization, non-BPA oriented organization. Let us try to understand what are the types of risks. Types of risks in BPA, if you have technology, if you have system, if you have network, if you have a centralized system, definitely there is going to be some basic process which is going to take place. Just try to listen to this and just try to think about it, whether you accept this or not. There is going to be an environment where this is going to be there in manual environment as well, but the risks which are there, which are generally classified as where any errors, any inaccuracy, any incompleteness, any unauthorizedness in these points which I'm going to tell you now will result in risks. So at what points different kinds of risks could come up, that is something which we are going to talk about. So our syllabus says there are different types of risks. One is something which could be considered as input and access. That means what? The data which is being inputted, may not be inputted in a correct manner. There may be errors while entering the data. Definitely if there are errors while entering the data, that means the processing is going to be disturbed. That means the output is going to be wrong. You cannot have the right output with the wrong input. If the source is wrong, the destination has to be wrong. If you are trying to plant a tree related to apple, and if you sow the mango seeds, you won't be getting, if you're understanding. So this is a very general thing, and the point is also general, that input and access, the data may be inaccurate, incomplete, or there may be unauthorized access. This is something which is possible in case of automation. A person may get into your account. You may get into my account in an unauthorized manner, if you're understanding. So that possibility is always there. Controls is something which you are going to put, but possibility is there, if you're understanding. Why we are putting the controls? Because there is a possibility of such things to happen. So input and access could be a risk in case of BPA risks, if you're understanding. Now the second risk could be something known as process risks or processing. Now it is said that the data may not be processed in a correct manner. Data may not be processed correctly or accurately, or there may be errors in the processing. Now these statements are there. This statement is there in the book, and you can make numerous assumptions of such a statement, that processing means what? The data is inputted, you have inputted some value. Now there is going to be some calculation which is going to take place, like you have inputted 4 items of 400 rupees. Now GST is going to be applied, and it is going to be multiplied by 4, and finally you are going to get the bill amount which the customer has to pay. So the GST may not be put in a proper manner, the calculation may be wrong, it may be taking some more input. Instead of multiplication there would have been division, which would have been there, if you're understanding. So in such a case, not only one but millions of transactions would go wrong in an automated atmosphere. So processing, now we are not talking about any controls, that how we are going to stop it. We just need to understand what could be the problems, and then later we would be deciding whether these problems would be fitted in my systems or not, my organization. If it is there, we would be giving it a response with a control, if you're understanding. So input is one thing, process is another thing. Next could be something known as, now definitely in a centralized network, just try to answer me this, there are branches. Just try to imagine the infrastructure, or just try to imagine the architecture. There are banks branches, there are ATMs, there are phone banks, there are mobile banking. Now all these things are connected to a single central data center. There are big bazaars which are there, 1,000 branches in all over the country, and all these 1,000 branches are connected to a single central data center. There are millions of McDonald's which are there throughout the world. Just imagine, and they are connected to a single central data center. So you get a structure where branches and everything connect to a single central place with a line which would be drawn. That line which gets drawn in your mind, the cable or the connection, is something which is known as, which helps. Don't you think at each and every second, less than a second, lot of data is being transmitted along that cable, and if the data is not transmitted, the transactions are not going to happen, if you're understanding. So next point is there, something which is known as file and data transmission. file and data transmission. Now this point tries to tell us that the file and data which would be transmitted, there may be errors in the network, may not be transmitted in a proper manner, in a correct manner, in an accurate manner. Again, we don't need to talk about why this happened. We don't need to talk about how could we stop this. We just need to talk about what could happen. So this is something which could happen while the file is moving from one place to another. You cannot like stop moving the file from one place to another, but you'll have to put some measures through which you could stop the error. So in case of BPA, one is input and access, second is processing, third is file and data transmission, fourth could be something which is known as output. Again, output may come into the hands of unauthorized people. Some reports, some confidential data may come into. In chapter number 3 you have controls, where you have input controls, output controls, processing controls, data controls. A lot of controls are there, in which output controls almost has 6 different points, where all the 6 points talk about something known as output, a report or a hard copy or a soft copy coming into the hand of an unauthorized personnel. That is something which is considered, almost 1 page is there. So how important this is, that output shouldn't come into the hands of the people who are not authorized to see the things. So input could be one, second could be processing, third could be output, fourth could be file and data transmission, fifth could be something known as data itself. Okay, now over here you just need to understand that data could be of 2 types. One is something which is known as master data, and this is something which you already know. Okay, don't expect me to explain, and I expect that you are aware of this. We have seen this in chapter number 2, chapter number 5. Master and transaction data may be accessed in an unauthorized manner. So some person may have some may try to take some unauthorized access and get into some person's account and change the things in an unauthorized manner. That is something which could happen in case of data, if you're understanding. So input is one, processing, file and data transmission, output, data, and last is something which is known as infrastructure. Now infrastructure means what? That your entire data, your entire assets of the data which you have collected, the customers data, the employees data, the transaction related data. So that is something which is a very important, or the very crucial aspect of, most crucial aspect, that is something on which you have put your entire efforts of your life to collect those things, refine those things, research on those things, and you would be keeping it in a particular place. You may keep it in a data center at a particular place. Now it may happen that infrastructure may get damaged due to disaster. If you're understanding, some kind of natural calamity may come up and your infrastructure may get damaged, and that is something where infrastructural risks may come up and your data and program may be lost because that infrastructure doesn't have any kind of backup and it is already destroyed because of the disaster. So this is something which is there. Actually you could have, if you remember the virtualization, where applications of virtualization, where we have a disaster recovery, hot standby, if you remember, that is something which is a control. Okay, so the control is there because this kind of risk is there, if you're understanding. So there are like 6 points which you need to remember. One could be, you could remember these with the help of iPod file structure, where I could be input, processing, output, data, file could be file and data transmission, and structure could be infrastructure. So these are the risks which are related to BPA, risks of business process automation. Important from the examinations perspective, you need to remember these. iPod file structure, input, processing, output, data, file and data transmission, infrastructure, which would be disaster related. So these are something which are related to. So what is risk? Risk is something which would be an event which would be resulting in a significant deviation from the planned objective, taking you away from something which is planned. You are moving, you decided to come to class and you know that it takes 15 minutes. to come to class basically. So if there is a traffic jam, it may result in 30 minutes. So your planned objective was deviated because of the traffic jam. So accordingly on the next day you would be planning with a proper control, so that that risks doesn't hamper you. So when you get deviated from your planned objective, that is something which is a risk which has come, and definitely it results in a negative consequence, definitely unwanted negative consequence. You need to remember this definition of risks. And types of BPA risks are something which are 6. Then we have something which is known as types of business risks. Now, easy, very easy. It's just that you need to remember types of business risks. The first one which we have is known as strategic risks. Now, strategic risks, second is something which could be financial risks. Third is something which could be operational risks. Fourth is something which could be reputational risks. Fifth is something which could be, last one, regulatory risks. Regulatory, or you can term it as compliance. Now, strategic risks. Strategic risks are the risks, we just need to remember what are these. Basically, which move the organization away from achieving its objectives or goals. Okay, basically, if you are not able to achieve your objectives or goals, and if there is some risk which is stopping you from doing it, definitely it is a type of strategic risk. Financial risks are the risks which are there, which results in negative. It results in negative financial impact, or it is driving your organization to some losses. Okay, some risks which are some changes in the market, some unwanted or not beneficial for you, such changes happening in the market, okay, will result in losses, demonetization, etc. Operational risks, your operations are not proper, there is a problem in your operations, as in your operation processes which we saw. So your efficiency and effectiveness is in a problem. Your implementation, basically implementation is a problem. You are not having the skilled labor, you are not having the appropriate resources, you are not having the appropriate leader who is able to handle various implementation situations. So that is something which could result in. Reputational risks is something which could result in negative publicity. Basically, your organization's reputation is damaged because of something negative happening, some people getting a bad name, something, reputational risks. Like reputational risk is something where, your operations may be proper, but your reputation, like for example, some time back you would have heard of something known as, in terms of the Bollywood industry, there was something known as Me Too movement. Me Too movement, where the actors who did some wrong activities were like highlighted. Now their acting was not bad, their skills were not improper, they were good in their profession, but they still faced a reputational damage because of the Me Too movement, if you remember. So the reputational damage which was faced, as a producer or a director, I may not cast that particular person because his reputation is under damage, if you understand, is damaged basically. So definitely your business is affected even if your processes are correct, but your reputation has gone wrong because of some activity. Reputation can be completely off the track. It may be related to a very different thing, some personal life of the CEO as well can affect the organization, if you're understanding. So that is something where reputation doesn't have any fixed aspect of just the processes or functioning or the resources or the raw materials or the employees. It can be any other factor as well. So reputation risk resulting in negative publicity of the organization. Last is something which could be termed as regulatory compliance, as in your organization not following the legal aspects, okay, resulting in penalties, fines, okay. So not following the laws and regulations. Like, you know, if you remember the implementation of BPA, which had like 8 points, the second point itself was like understanding the rules, that is understanding the laws and rules and regulations of the particular state, country, etc. So if you do not, that means it is a very important thing. Your system is expected to be, can be accepted as slow, but it cannot be accepted as illegal, cannot be accepted as not following the compliance or regulatory requirements. So if your system doesn't have the appropriate, it could be anything, it could be GST, it could be TDS, it could be any kind of, you know, tax related thing, any kind of government aspect which should be there in the system, it should be there, if you're understanding. So such things, and it could be anything, you know, your products are not, like your products are not certified, your products having some you know, problem in the content, anything it could be. It's not about just the system having the appropriate formulas. So your organization not following the legal aspects can result in something which is known as regulatory risks, which would be fines. A school, for example, has to follow a particular strength and particular number of classrooms, just for your information. Like if there are 10, there shouldn't be more than 40 students in a class according to CBSE curriculum. So if you do not, you would be falling onto the regulatory risks, if you understand, and you'll have to pay. Definitely there's some penalty per student you have to pay in such a case. Just for your information, I'm telling you that risks related to regulatory will result in fines or penalties, and you will have to, your organization would be becoming something which is unlawful and that is not accepted by the you know, the laws of that particular nation. So there are 5 types of business risks which you could remember with the help of strategy, which would be strategic. For F would be financial, O would be operational, R would be, now you can term it as regulatory. Strategy for reputation, strategy for reputation, where strategic risks, financial risks, operational risks, regulatory and reputation risks. So this is some reputational. This is something which you need to remember from the examinations perspective. Your syllabus just has almost one line explanation of these risks. We don't need to know how it would come. We don't need to know how it would be stopped while talking about just the types of risks. So our syllabus divides it into 2 parts. One is something which is known as types of risks related to BPA, and one is something which is known as types of risks which is related to business. So business risks was the second one. Now, what has happened is, in our syllabus we have a topic, just try to listen to this. We have a topic which is known as I'm sorry, I'm not explaining you right now. There is a topic which is known as enterprise risk management. Now this topic is actually there before these types of risks which we have seen, but in order to understand these topics I have just rearranged it in the book so that we could see the risks first, and then we could see something known as how to manage the risk, if you understand. So you should be aware of some risks, then only, as in you should be aware of what could be the problems in order to come for the solution. So first we look at the problem and then we look at the solution. In case of implementation of BPA as well, define why we plan to implement BPA was the first thing. Then we add the fourth point as objectives. Similarly over here as well, enterprise risk management is something which you are going to see right now after looking at the types of risks or understanding what is a risk, if you're understanding. So enterprise risk management is an important topic, is a very sensible topic, is an elaborated topic, and a healthy topic, and there are risk managers in the organizations who are very important for the organization and who have a very healthy income as well. So such people are of great value in the organization today. So what is enterprise risk management? Definitely, as the name indicates, managing the risks in an enterprise organization. Okay, now how you are going to manage the risk? Now basically try to listen. Okay, it is not very difficult, but you will be able to understand after I complete all these points. The last point, when I complete it, you would be able to understand. In between, if you miss it, it would be difficult for you to understand. So what happens is, this point says that anything you do, your organization may have to face some kind of risks. So enterprise risk management is something where you would be considering what could be the risks which could come, okay, in a particular process. Like when an organization forms a strategy of going for something known as keeping the price of the product as low as possible. Suppose this is a strategy. So it may have some kind of risks that some competitor may copy it, some may make the products slightly innovate it. Some people may innovate it slightly and then try to sell it into the market as a new product. So you should be making sure that as your responsibility in that case would be that the price shouldn't, it won't be feasible for anyone to go beyond that price, something like that, if you're understanding. Like Reliance Jio, it went into something known as keeping the price as low as possible, and no one would have that feasibility or that capability to expand in such a way, if you understand. So you would be considering. So what I'm trying to say is, risk management is something which is considered at the formation of the strategy only, at the beginning only. It's not something that it would be a factor which we would be considering later, and we may consider it, we may not consider. That is not something which is going to happen if you do not consider it alongside. While the strategy is being made, your organization would be in danger, and if it is in danger, you may not be able to come out of it because you have not planned for such situations. So planning for something which is unplanned and which is like unwanted and which is like negative for your organization is risk management. So how we are going to plan for the unplanned, how we are going to plan for something negative, you will have to understand that this is something, this enterprise risk management is definitely made by the organization's top people, or as the strategy would be made by the top people. So it starts from the top people itself, directors, the board of directors would be involved in order to make the response for the risks which could come. Where it would be applied, who would be making it? These would be making it. Where it would be applied in strategy setting process only. While making the strategy, you are going to talk about the various risks. Okay, so where it would be applied in strategic process setting only, if you're understanding that. At the time of making strategy, you would be considering the various events, like how will you do it. It would be applied at strategy setting. This means what? This process starts from the beginning itself. As soon as your work starts, thinking about what is to be done starts, your risk management also starts. At that point only you start thinking about the negative aspects to stop them, basically. How do you do it? By determining the potential events which could come. Potential events means what? Some factors, some triggers which may come up in the market, like demonetization came up, like tax rate changes came up. So such factors which may come up tomorrow, okay, some legal changes which may come up, but you should be prepared beforehand. So by determining the potential events, you would be able to prepare yourself beforehand, so that those things do not become as a surprise for you, those things do not result in a huge loss for you. You are already prepared, you would be able to fight against it, you would be able to survive it, if you're understanding. So potential events should be determined. It could be anything related to political, economical, any factor. It could be your internal as well, your employees leaving the organization, 5 employees leaving suddenly. You should be prepared for such a thing, if you're understanding. So one is, it is applied at the beginning. Second is something which is like strategy setting. Third is something which is like potential events. Okay, anything it could be like, the lectures which a person is delivering, there may be a possibility of the lectures getting leaked. Now this is something, the lectures getting leaked, is it something which I would consider after preparing everything, or is it something which I would be considering at the beginning itself? The maker, the developer, or the initiator who initiated the plan of virtual thing would be having the first thing at his back of his mind, that if it gets leaked, so why don't we put the controls right away so that there is no possibility of lectures getting leaked. So the passwords, the keys, the lectures not getting copied, they're getting played in Rio players, specific players to be made, encryption, everything is something which is there to prevent the negative aspects. Understanding? If there is no one who is going to leak it, okay, then these aspects are of no use. But in order to protect from leakage, from any kind of unauthorized access, we are putting such controls. So we think at the beginning itself. So it is thought by the makers itself. It is thought while strategy setting only, when everything is started. It is thought, how is it thought, that what could be the ways in which the lectures could be leaked, if you're understanding. So potential events are determined. Fourth is, the events are determined and there is a factor. Now try to listen to this. There is a factor which is known as risk appetite. Risk appetite. So your responsibility after determining, just try to listen, okay, after determining the potential events would be to manage the risk, in such a way that it is kept inside the risk appetite. It is kept inside the risk appetite, if you're understanding. That means what? What is risk appetite? Risk appetite, the definition of risk appetite according to the syllabus and general definition is the risk which an organization is allowed to take, if you're understanding. So beyond that risk, if the factor goes or if the organization goes, it would be resulting in a huge or a loss, if you're understanding. So I have like 100 employees in the organization, but the work is such that 95 employees if are present, suppose, okay, that means organization would be able to perform in a proper manner, like suppose in a call center there are 60,000 calls in a day. Okay, 60,000 calls in a day, and there are 500 employees. So one person would be taking 2, 0. One person would be taking 120 calls in a day. So 500 employees, I have already hired 120 calls in a day is easy for a person to take, but I have already hired 520 employees because there is a possibility of 20 people being absent on a day, or 10 people being absent on a day, or 15 people may not be having that productivity, something like that. So beyond 520, if more than 20 people are not there, definitely it would be going beyond the risk appetite. Are you understanding? The potential event was people not being there when required. So what did I do? I determined my risk appetite and how many people not there, or how many people could I keep in order to protect from the potential event that the people are not there. I hired extra 20 employees, if you're understanding. That is something which a response to the risk I gave, and by hiring 520 employees, I tried to keep the risk in the risk appetite, under the risk appetite. So my risk appetite is that 20 people could be absent in a day and still things could work, if you're understanding. So your responsibility is determining the risk appetite of a particular thing. May it be finance, may it be employees, okay, may it be the number of transactions, may it be the number of products sold. You should be able to determine the risk appetite and develop measures in such a way that you are able to keep those risks under the risk appetite by implementing the appropriate controls. So fourth, actually this is one definition only, but it has like 5 different parts or points separated by commas. So fifth is like, if you are able to do this, definitely it would be helping in accomplishment of objectives. So this is a very important. Last is something which would automatically come, if you understand. Like if you clear CPT, if you clear IPCC, if you clear final or CA intermediate, definitely you become a chartered accountant. So if you are able to achieve these 4, fifth is something which is, you don't need to do some extra efforts for the fifth one. So there are like 5 points which you need to remember systematically. Sensible point. I've tried my best to explain this. Just try to pay attention. First is something that there would be top level people involved. Second is something that it would be applied in the strategy setting process only. This means what? That while making the strategy only you decide the risk factor, and if you find that the risk is huge, you may not move ahead in making the strategy, or you may not go in that direction. If you try to do some business, if you are thinking about getting into some kind of business, so you try to think about some strategy and you come to know that the competitors are already there, the market is already not there, then strategy came, the risk factor came in and you gave up. So that is not something which is a coward thing. This is something which is strategically you found it incorrect. So not spending anywhere not spending in an incorrect manner or spending in a wrong way is better. Is far better than spending in a wrong way is. Spending in a wrong way is not good, if you're understanding. Rather, you can just save the amount or money which you have. So saving is better than spending in the wrong way. That is what I'm trying to tell you. So that is something which you considered as a sensible thing, and you didn't go ahead in that kind of business because the risk factor came in and we didn't have the appropriate response, that we don't have the market, we don't have such kinds of product, we don't have the margin for those particular things. So it is applied at the beginning only. You try to think about the negative factors or the risks at the beginning only. So top level people, the makers of the organization would be involved. It would be applied in strategy setting process. Okay, you would be determining the potential events which could come, as in future what aspects could affect your organization's objectives. You would try to manage the risk under the risk appetite. Risk appetite is the amount of risk that the organization is allowed to take. That means this much is something which you could take, if you're understanding. So that is something, if I study 6 hours a day, I would be able to complete each and everything. But beyond 6 hours is my appetite. Beyond 6 hours or below 6 hours if I go, then the things would become dangerous for me. I may not be able to complete the entire syllabus. So you should, in order to complete the entire syllabus, which is your objective, 6 hours is your risk appetite. You study 8 hours a day, but you can come on to 6 hours. That is something to which you could come depending upon the time you have, or depending upon the number of days you have in your hand. That is something which is meant over here. So you'll have to keep it within the risk appetite, otherwise things would be dangerous. And definitely if you do it in such a way, you would be able to clear the exam or accomplish the objective. So this is something which you need to keep in mind in terms of enterprise risk management's definition, if you're paying attention. So these are the 5 points from the enterprise risk management's point of view, the definition of enterprise risk management. So this is something which you need to remember exactly as it is. This topic makes a lot of sense as well. So if you have understood this, we have the next heading as in the same topic, benefits of enterprise risk management, ERM. Okay, what are the benefits of ERM? We need to remember 4 to 5 of these at least. Okay, first one is something where align risk appetite APP with strategy. you would be able to determine your strategy, you would be able to determine your risk appetite, and you'll try your best to put the procedure in such a way that everything is kept within the risk appetite. So knowing the strategy, knowing the risk appetite would be the first thing which you are going to do, and then you are going to mix it in such a way that your strategy runs and the things are under control. If if you put the controls to keep the things under the risk appetite, if you're understanding. So aligning the risk appetite with strategy is something which we gain from the enterprise risk management, if you're understanding. So you made a strategy of taking 1,000 calls in a day or selling 1,000 products in a day. So your risk appetite is something which you decided that I have 600 employees but 550 employees should be there. So that is something which you could decide in the beginning itself, that you cannot give leave to the employees, more than 20 employees on a particular day, if you're understanding, more than 40 employees on a particular day. As a result of which, in organizations as well, the people usually try to give an application much before then the leave is needed, because it is like things are appropriately sorted if you are able to provide such kind of risk appetite control, if you're understanding. So aligning risk appetite with strategy becomes possible. Second is something which is like enhance risk response decisions. Now you would be able to respond to risks, you would be able to give the appropriate response to the appropriate risks which could be there. Now our syllabus says just try to listen to these points. I'll try to explain right now itself. There could be 4 responses to risks, and depending upon the risk, just try to listen, okay, important. Depending upon the risks, the response would be there. The 4 responses could be avoidance, risk avoidance, risk avoidance, risk acceptance, risk reduction, and risk sharing. These could be the 4 responses to risks, if you're understanding. So you could decide which respond to be given to what kind of risk, and that is something which is a very good tool. ERM, enterprise risk management, is a very good tool in determining what kind of response is to be given to the appropriate risk. First could be something which is known as avoidance. It means what? That you are going to avoid the work itself. That means what? That a person has come with a proposal or some kind of new product or something like that, and a thing strike into your mind that this thing will have a great amount of risk because the customer may not accept it, that is too expensive or something like that, and you decided not to go in such a business. So you don't even go into such a business, you try to avoid it, and that is something which is like avoiding the work itself in order to avoid the risk. This could be one response, if you understand. Second, reduction. You try to reduce the risk by, you try to, there is some unauthorized access which could happen, so you try to reduce it by, no one could say that this cannot be hacked, you cannot get it in writing, but you apply encryption, you apply the security, you put in place appropriate controls in order to reduce the risk, because you cannot work along with the risk going, and you cannot avoid the work as well. In order to come to an intermediate solution, you try to reduce it by putting a security guard in place, by putting the cameras in place, by putting as much as you can, because your core business is something which may have risk. So you cannot just stop the business. You can reduce the risk by putting the appropriate controls. You can have the biometric controls. So actually the controls point is the reduction, where you actually put money, efforts, time, employees, etc. in order to reduce the risk. So you try to reduce with the help of various controls. That is something which is known as reduction, where you try to give a response to the risk that I have to do the work and I cannot do the work without putting the controls, because if that kind of risk comes, I would be nowhere, if you understand. So you try to reduce it by putting the appropriate controls. Okay, one could be something known as sharing. Sharing means what? That you do not take the risk like, you know, this risk is such that if there is a particular object, there is particular organization, there is particular object, there is particular entity, particular system, the risk is such that the risk which you are talking about is such that it doesn't come regularly, but if it comes, it would be taking the entire thing away with itself, if you're understanding. So your bike is something where you could share the risk with a third party. If the bike, you know, goes into some kind of robbery, then you can take the insurance of that bike, because it is not something which happens regularly. So you usually do not take its responsibility, you share the responsibility, and that organization also earns, and your bike is also protected with a nominal premium, if you're understanding. So you do not keep a bike for a second bike, if you're understanding, as in you don't keep a second bike or the first, or keep multiple things, if you're understanding. That is also not feasible. As a result of which, is something which is known as sharing, as in giving it to a third party, and the third party is like insurance. That organization would be taking care, would be sharing the responsibility with the third party. Excuse me. One is something which is known as avoidance, avoiding the work completely. One is something which is known as reduction. One is something which is known as sharing. Last is something which is known as accepting. Accepting the risk. The response is, I accept the risk as it is, because the control which I am going to put, that means the risk is there, and I am going to do that work as well. I am not going to put any kind of control as well. Why? Because the control which I am going to put is more expensive than the loss which is going to happen if the risk turns out to be positive, if you're understanding. So you just need to remember these four names. The explanation is there later, but try to understand each and every letter itself has the meaning. Avoidance, you avoid the risk. Acceptance, you accept the risk as it is without any controls. Why? Because your computer is of 4,000 rupees, and suppose, just for a hypothetical example, and your antivirus is of like 6,000 rupees. Will you try to, you would be getting a new computer for 4,000, why do you have to pay 6,000 for the antivirus? So in such a way, you are trying to protect an asset where the protection is expensive than if the asset is lost, if you understand. So in that case, you just accept the risk. So avoid the risk, accept the risk, if you're understanding. Third is something which could be like sharing the risk. You give the responsibility to a third party because there is a very less possibility of it coming, but if it comes, it would be like completely taking it away from you. So you cannot just accept it, you need to pay a nominal amount to protect it, which should be protected by the third party. And fourth could be something reducing it, where this is the actual point where you would be putting in controls in order to reduce the risk, if you're understanding. So because of the enterprise risk management, what you could do is you can note down all the potential events which could come, and you could decide the appropriate response which could be given to those events. You could either avoid, accept, share, or reduce are the four types of responses, which is the second benefit, or which is the benefit of something which is known as enterprise risk management. Third point which you could remember is, now since you are prepared of various factors which could be negative for you, which could be result in loss for you, and you have put the appropriate controls for it as well, that means nothing would be like, you know, a surprise for you, nothing would be like a major loss for you, if you're understanding. So you are prepared for each and everything. So minimizing, because since you have thought about it, you have thought about what all things could come in the future, and if that thing comes, you are already prepared, you already knew that may happen. So it shouldn't be like, you know, you shouldn't be like shocked, oh my god, this thing happened, now what to do. This won't be the reaction. Okay, so this thing has happened, we have the controls, let us try to put the appropriate control. That is something which would be the response. So it minimizes the, you know, surprises, minimizes operational, the work related surprises, and hence the losses. This is something which is the third point which you could remember in case of enterprise risk management, where the first one would be aligning risk appetite with strategy, second would be enhancing the risk response decisions, which could be like 4 types of decisions which could be taken: avoid, accept, reduce and share. And third is something where it tries to minimize the operational losses, and something which is known as surprises. Fourth is something which is known as, what could happen, suppose you have noted down the risks, multiple risks related to operations, producing the product, related to marketing a product or something like that, related to selling the product or something like that, related to distribution, related to having multiple branches. So there could be multiple branches in a city, and you may have employees in different branches, and you may transfer employees from one place to another. So you can have, what you could do is, fourth one says that since you have, like, you go to some place, suppose you visited some place for some particular meeting, and it was a dream of you to visit that particular historical place as well in that. So what you did, you conducted the meeting as well, and so multiple things were conducted in a single instance. Likewise, what could happen, you could note down all the risks, okay, and you could provide an integrated response. Provide an integrated response in such a way, that multiple risks could be avoided in a single control. That is something which you could decide, and that would depend on situation to situation. Okay, so multiple risks could be avoided with the help of you could, like, employees' attendance could be taken with biometric, and employees' unauthorized access could also be protected from biometric. So you had 2 problems. Okay, you had 2 problems of attendance not getting recorded properly, and resulting in incorrect remuneration, and there were unauthorized access as well which was taking place. What did you do? These multiple risks got an integrated single response of a biometric system, if you understand. So that is something where providing integrated response to multiple risks could be done. So this would make your solution more efficient, where a single system would be taking care of multiple risks rather than you putting multiple system for multiple risks. You can put one system and try to cover as many risks as possible. So if you write it down, if you note it down, if you understand the process, then only you would be able to come with such a good thought process of providing integrated response to multiple risks, if you're understanding. Last is something which is known as, potential events. Is something which enterprise risk management says, that we would be determining the potential events. Strategy setting. Third is potential events. So potential events is definitely, we are trying to keep the risk under risk appetite, but potential event can also be opportunities. What could be grabbed in the future? Looking at the situation, I think that this is going to happen. The petrol price is going to come down, this is going to happen, these notes are going to get, the online technology is going to improve, this is something where everything is going to become mobile application oriented, this is also going to be, so gold is going to sold online, something like that, you are predicting. So looking at the current scenario, you could be the first one to seize the opportunity. If you are able to forecast the future properly, then it is not only the risks which you are going to forecast, you can forecast the opportunity as well, and have appropriate measures so that you become the first one to grab such an opportunity. Looking at this, I think this organization would be closing down. Why don't we become the first one that as soon as it closes down, why don't we release our product in the market for free or something like that? Determining the future, being opportunistic, that is something which is the 5th point, where not only it helps us to kill the risk, but also grab as much as opportunities as possible. So this is the 5th point which you need to remember. First could be something which is known as align risk appetite and strategy. Second, enhance risk response decisions. Third could be something which is known as minimize operational surprises and losses. Fourth could be integrated response to multiple risks. And last could be something which is known as seize opportunities. So there would be a technique through which you would be remembering these 5 points. Benefits of ERM, sensible, easy. I hope you have understood. So after the benefits of the ERM, the benefits of the ERM could be remembered by, you know, those 5 benefits could be remembered with seize multiple surprises to enhance the strategy, to enhance. This is something which you could write in your book as well, and in your my summary as well. Your my summary can be made with the help of these points: seize 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, so seize opportunities, integrated response to multiple risks, minimize operational surprises and losses, enhance risk response decisions, and align risk appetite with strategy is something through which you could remember the 5 benefits of ERM. Okay, now we have the last thing in case of ERM, which is very important and again sensible. Let us try to directly jump on the answer or the question which is there. You know, enterprise risk management, we saw the definition. Now it is going to work in parts, as in step by step. You know, you would be moving step by step ahead. Like you moved ahead in how do we go about in the implementation of BPA. We saw 8 steps. Likewise over here as well, we are going to move step by step, and once you understand it, you are going the 8 steps would be on your tips basically. So what all things do you need to remember? It is a sensible answer, so the points would come automatically in your mind one after another. So the heading of this part of ERM is something which is known as components of ERM. Now, components of enterprise risk management. Let us try to understand the components which are there, and then we would be moving towards something which is known as internal control as a topic which is there after ERM. Now the maximum content of ERM is repeated in internal control, so please pay attention because this answer is going to be repeated. Just 2 to 3 points would be added more, and the same answer would be written for another question as well. So try to understand as much as you can, because we are not going to repeat the understanding part, because it is just the next topic where we are going to see the same things again. So components of ERM. Now what happens is, just try to understand this. Your organization may be suppose you have an organization and you are the owner of the organization, and it is into selling something known as you know, bicycles. I am an organization and I am into something known as online trading of you know, some components, maybe the electricity components or hardware components, something like that. So don't you think your organization and my organization will have different sort of work to be done, will have different sort of things to be carried out? And since the things or work or the mission or the vision or the objectives or goals of the organizations would be different, definitely the risks which could be there in your organization would be different as compared to me, if you're understanding. My more focus would be on technology, security, passwords, encryption. Your more focus would be like more on the physical access controls, because you are a face-to-face shop basically. You are doing business on a bricks and mortar shop, a shop which is physically present and has everything physically to be shown to the customers. So your controls would be more sort of physical access control. My control would be more sort of logical access or network access or something which is, you know, more towards technology. Yours would be something which is more towards locks on the doors and everything, if you're understanding. So your controls would differ because your risks are different. Okay, my controls would differ because my risks are different. So when you would be planning for enterprise resource risk management, basically you will have to understand your organization first, if you're understanding, as in it would be varying depending upon the organization. Hence the first one, just try to listen. Before we decide what are the controls to manage the risk, what are the activities to be carried out to manage the risk, we will have to decide what type of organization it is. We will have to consider the type of environment in which we are dealing. Okay, because each environment may have, every environment of different business would be different. The risks would also be different. Hence, the first point to consider while going towards enterprise risk management is the internal environment. Internal environment means your organization's way of working or your organization's objective, mission, vision. So tone basically. So tone basically is something which is known as, or the the things in which you deal basically. Okay, so what sort of business it is, so that is something which is to be decided, that is something which is to be considered while determining the risks which are going to be there. So you will have to consider what kind of values your organization has, what kind of atmosphere your organization has, what kind of structure your organization has. So depending upon that, what kind of components, equipments your organization has, depending upon those things, your next point would be coming into picture, that is the risk management, because every type of organization may not have all the types of risks, and applying unnecessary controls is senseless if you understand. So understand the organization first and then move towards understanding the risks if you understand. So first is something which is known as internal environment. Second is something which is known as, now what happens is, here we are assuming that the organization is new organization, it is starting to get built, and we are also deciding the strategy, and that the enterprise risk management is applied in strategy setting. So we are also trying to build the organization as well if you're understanding. So second step is that you should know what you have to achieve in order to know what could stop you from achieving that if you're understanding. So you should be aware about your objectives or goals, so that you could come to know what could be the obstacles which could come in between. You cannot just randomly decide the risks where you have nothing to do with those risks in case of your objectives. Then again unnecessary, you would be putting the controls, and it would be just putting the cost and efforts which would be of no use if you're understanding. So you definitely put the controls in place where it is exactly needed. If there is an open room and there is nothing inside it, I don't think cameras would be an important thing, just because it is a control. But we do not have any specific risk over there if you're understanding. So your organization has to decide. Second step is known as that organization's objective should be clear. The top management who would be involved in setting the objective should set the objective if you're understanding, that what do you want to achieve, what are your mission, vision, goals, what are your targets basically. You should be clear in that, so that if you know what should be achieved, we know that we should sell these many products, we know that we should take these many calls in a day, we know that we should produce these many products. Now depending on that only, you will have to decide what could be the risks. There could be employee related risks, there could be machines related risk, there could be equipment structure related risk if you're understanding. So those risks would come into picture only if you know what is to be done from those employees or from those machines. So you would be planning the controls appropriately depending upon your objective. So it considers the internal environment, your risk, enterprise risk management. It considers what your objectives are. So these are the basic homework which are to be done. These are the mission, vision. You should decide this. The targets which need to be achieved. These should be decided, and then only you would be able to move ahead in determining what could be the risks if you're understanding. Because risk management, enterprise risk management, is a process of determining or forecasting the events which would be coming into the future, which may be as an opportunity for you, or they may be as risks for you if you're understanding. So the problems or the opportunities which would be coming in the future would only be known if you know what is to be achieved if you're understanding. So first is something which is known as internal environment. Second is something which is known as objective setting. Now, once you've set the objective, there may be some problems which may emerge. There may be some risks which may emerge if you're understanding. So third point they say is something which is known as event identification. event identification, anything which could either be an opportunity or a risk can be considered as an event. Okay, so it could be internal, it could be external, it could be an obstacle, it could be a boom for your organization in the strategy implementation and formulation and implementation basically. So there may be two types of event which would be coming. One could be termed as opportunities, second could be termed as risks. Now we don't talk about opportunities in this step. We just talk about something which are negative for us, something which result in loss for us, something which are not there for us, something which are not considered to be bad for us, if you're understanding. So over here it is said that objectives, you would be determining the opportunities which could come in achieving these targets or objectives, and the opportunities is something which are channeled back in the objective setting process. They would decide, the organization, I as an ERM person, I am not responsible for the opportunities to grab it or to leave it or to maximize it. I would be just stating it to the top management that do whatever you want to do about the opportunities, but I am going to move ahead in this term, if you're understanding. So firstly, I decided what kind of environment it is. Secondly, I decided what the objective it is to achieve. Third, I decided what could be the events which could come up, and out of those two events, that is opportunities and risks, I just took risks, and I would be deciding what is to be done about that risk. Try to understand. First is internal environment, second is something which is known as objective setting, third is something which is known as event identification, fourth is something which is known as, now just try to understand this, there are various kinds of risks in our life as well. We need to judge the risk, we need to measure the risk, we need to determine whether we need to respond to the risk or not. Is the risk so unprofitable or so harmful for us? Is it going to destroy us? Is it going to not do anything to us? How much is it going to affect us? So you are going to measure, you are going to judge, you are going to determine what sort of risk that is. You'll have to determine the response depending upon the strongness of the risk, depending upon the impact of the risk, depending upon the likelihood of the risk, if you're understanding. So this point is something which is an important point, which is known as risk assessment. What does risk assessment? Assessing the risk, determining how strong the risk is, determining what value does the risk carry. Okay, so risk assessment is something which is done, on two things you need to remember. Firstly, there is something which is known as inherent risk, and second is something which is known as residual risk. So what does this mean? If you know that there is some sort of risk which is going to affect us, you determine the inherent nature of it and residual nature of it. Inherent means what? That the risk which would come, if all the controls which you have applied, are fail. If all the controls which you have applied fail, just try to listen to me, okay? And residual risk is the risk which comes residual, remains, okay? Something which will remain every time. So residual risk is the risk which would be arising even if you have all the controls are successful. Okay, now try to listen to this. Inherent risk means what? That even if all the controls fail, this much is the loss which you are going to face. Residual risk means what? That if for a particular risk, suppose there are three types of risk, 1, 2 and 3. For number 1 risk, we have determined the inherent impact, which is like, all the controls fail, then this much would be the loss. Residual risk we have determined for number 1, that if all controls are successful, then this much is the loss, if you're understanding. For that risk also we are going to determine, there are 4 things, okay? We are going to determine something known as likelihood. That means what is the probability of the risk that it is going to come. Just try to listen. And 4th is something which is known as impact. How much loss it is going to make if the risk becomes successful, if no controls are applied. Okay, so likelihood, impact is like, Now this would give us a particular value. That means what? Likelihood means how much is the probability of the risk that is going to come and how much is the loss it is going to make. For example, there is a risk which comes once in a year. If it becomes successful, we face a loss of like 10 lakh rupees, and there is a risk which comes like 4 times in a year, but even if it comes once, we face a loss of something like 1 lakh rupees. So even if it comes for 4 times, the loss would be of 4 lakhs, and even if that single risk comes for once, the loss would be of 10 lakhs. So my loss would be more in the first risk which has come. So first I am prioritizing the risk, if you're understanding. So I am arranging the risk in such a way that the maximum risks which destroys me to the maximum extent, the risk which is very harmful for me to the maximum extent, I put the controls for that first, if you're understanding. So you need to determine that most important thing over here is the likelihood and impact. That is the probability, the possibility of the risk coming, how much is the possibility, and the impact, as in how much time, how much loss it is going to make if it becomes successful. So I'm going to rearrange them, and then I'm going to give a response to them, if you're understanding. So if you are paying attention, first one is something which is known as internal environment. Okay, internal environment, the tone of the organization. Second is something which is known as objective setting. Okay, third is something which is known as event identification, where there could be two. One could be something which is known as risk, second could be something which is known as opportunities are channeled back to the objective setting process. Risk could be moving ahead. So this is the first, this is the second, this is the third. Fourth is something which is known as risk assessment. Now risk assessment has two things. One is known as one is known as inherent risk, second is known as residual risk, third factor is likelihood, and fourth is something which is known as impact. On these 4 factors you would be able to assess the risk and determine what response is to be given to what kind of risk depending upon the loss you are going to face. So if you have assessed the risk, if you have prioritized the risk, if you have given the numbers to the risk, in the 5th step you are going to give something known as risk response. So based on each and every step is like related to each other based on the risk assessment which you have done. Okay, based on the risk assessment you would be trying to keep everything within the, you would be trying, risk response would be the 4 things which you have already seen in the enhanced risk response decisions. Avoid, accept, share, and avoid, accept, share, and reduce would be the 4 responses, and out of these 4 you would be giving appropriate responses to these risks, if you're understanding. So risk response would also be based on how much is your tolerance capacity. Just try to listen to this. Your risk tolerance capacity and your risk appetite should be aligned with each other. Okay, so your risk, like your strategy and risk appetite was aligned. Similarly, how much risk you could take or how much risk you could bear should be aligned with the risk which you could take. It means what? That it may happen that you may not be able to, through this you would be able to keep the risk under the risk appetite by determining what kind of response is to be given, so that your risk tolerance capacity, okay, this much is the tolerance, and your risk, as in your tolerance should match with the appetite. Otherwise, if it doesn't matches, then it would be going out of that particular boundary and it would be resulting in a loss. So your tolerance should match to the risk appetite, and appropriate response should be generated, which could be like avoid, accept, reduce, and share, if you are paying attention. So in the 4th point you need to remember inherent, residual, likelihood, impact. In the 5th point you need to remember risk tolerance and risk appetite should be aligned, and there could be 4 responses to the risks, which could be, so if your response is wrong, that means what? That you have gone out, your risk tolerance has gone out of the risk appetite, and that would result in the loss. So you making sure that your risk tolerance is such that it is there within the risk appetite. You will have to decide what kind of response I could take so that there is no loss, as in there could be reducing the risk. If you take the response of reducing the risk, then you have to make sure that the tolerance capacity, as in fighting against the risk, should not make sure that your risk is going out of the risk appetite. Okay, like you have a tolerance capacity of having, you know, if you have a tolerance capacity of handling the work if I have, you know, 50 employees in the organization, if you're understanding. Now, risk appetite is if you are not able to do this much amount of work in a day, okay, you would be at risk. So this much amount of work should be done with the 50 employees, and that is something where your tolerance capacity is trying to be matched with something known as risk appetite, if you're understanding. So your tolerance capacity, that means your capacity of handling the risk or having 50 employees at once, is something which would be helping us. That means what? You may have hired 55 to 60 employees in the organization, and you try to keep it within the tolerance capacity so that you don't go out of the risk appetite of the task, if you're understanding. So there should be a proper alignment of tolerance with the appetite, and secondly there should be a proper response which should be given to the risk, which could be any of the four: avoid, accept, reduce and share. Okay, now suppose you have given a response to the risk that suppose you have decided that you have taken a response of reduce for that particular risk. What did you do? You assessed the risk and you came to know that this is a risk which could come in future. We will have to reduce the risk. So what did you do? You decided to reduce the risk. Okay, so how do you reduce the risk? You might have decided that from tomorrow we would be having cameras into the organization, we would be having biometric system into the organization, we would be forcing the employees to carry their, you know, if you don't have cameras, we would be forcing the employees to carry their ID cards in the organization. So that is something which is the things which you have decided, as in the implementation things which you have decided, is something which is known as control activities. That means what? These activities would be carried out in order to gain the response of the risk, in order to achieve the control to the risk, if you're understanding. So these are the actual implementation, if you're understanding. So these are the actual things which would be decided. Reduce is something which you decided as a response. Now for this reduce, you would be creating appropriate policies, procedures and practices, so that this risk is reduced in a proper manner. So from tomorrow there would be no unauthorized access. How? We are following a procedure of keeping such mechanism of biometric systems, and that is how we are going to give a response to the risk where not unwanted people won't be getting into the organization, something like that, if you're understanding. So control activities is something where you decide what is to be done in order to achieve the positiveness for the response which you decided. Okay, the response, suppose you decided to reduce, you would be implementing the response by the control activities. So as head of the organization, you also decided what would be the control activities which would be carried out henceforth in the organization. So first one was internal environment, second one was objective setting, third one was event identification, fourth one was risk assessment, fifth one was risk response, sixth one was control activities, seventh one is something which is known as, now control activities you have decided as an owner, as the top official of the organization, so you have decided. So what would be the next thing? Information and communication. So the information which is there, the information which you have collected, the information which you have gathered from these 6 steps, okay, each and every employee, the information should flow, and the controls which are to be carried out, you know, the people should be made aware of what we are doing exactly, and the controls which you are going to put from tomorrow, it should be communicated to the employees of the organization so that they follow it, friends. So that is something which is a simple thing, where the things should be properly disseminated, as in transferred to the people in the right manner, They should know their roles and responsibilities. Their people should be appointed in a proper manner, and things should be carried out in such a way that they shouldn't be like, I was not aware. It's your responsibility to make the people aware that from tomorrow this is something which is going to be followed in the organization. That is the 7th step. So actually the implementation or thinking what is to be done to manage the risk is something which is done in these 6 steps only. 7th is something which is communication, the information is just transferred or carried forward, and 8th is something, things would be monitoring. You would have some monitoring mechanism. You can have some heads which would be monitoring the process. You can have some activities through which the things could be evaluated. So you will have to arrange some measures so that any change which is required, any modification which is required in the control activities could be done if there are some problems which are faced. So you could have people who are monitoring the things. Okay, you could collect the data from the system regularly so that you come to know how much is the current system being used, are people accepting it, not accepting it, is the system behaving properly, whatever things which you have implemented in the control activities, is it proper, is it according to what we require, is it fulfilling our risk response requirement, if you understand. That is something which would be the 8th step, and if there are any changes, they would be suggested and the control activities may be changed. The control activities which consist of policies and procedures in order to implement the response to the risk would be changed, if you're understanding. So there are 8 points in case of enterprise risk management which you need to understand. First is something which is known as internal environment. Second is something which is known as objective setting. Internal environment, tone of the organization. Objective setting, determining the mission, vision of the organization. Event identification is something where 2 types of events could be identified. One could be risks, second could be opportunities. Opportunities are channeled back, and risks is something which is like taken ahead, and a response would be, or it would be assessed. Inherent basis, residual risk, likelihood and impact. On the basis of these things, you don't need to explain what is inherent, you don't need to explain what is residual. Okay, our syllabus doesn't explain that. So you need to decide inherent. On the basis of that, you need to assess the risk. Then we have the response which would be there. A response should be such that your risk tolerance capacity and your risk appetite should be aligned. So there could be 4 responses. There could be 4 responses only through which you would be aligning. You should make sure that risk tolerance and risk appetite are aligned. The 4 responses could be like, you avoid the risk avoidance is like avoiding the work because your boundary is getting passed, as in your risk appetite, you're not able to maintain your risk tolerance within the risk appetite. You may suffer a great amount of loss as a result of it. Risk avoidance is a response. So that avoidance is also trying to keep your risk tolerance under risk appetite, where you're not taking the risk at all. Second is risk acceptance. Third is like sharing, and fourth could be something which could be like reduction in the risk difference. So appropriately you would be deciding what could be the response, and you would be deciding what are the control activities, that is the policies and procedures which are to be carried out in order to satisfy the response which was decided in the previous step. Then we have something known as information and communication. The information which is gathered is to be collected in a proper manner and should be people should be made aware, and the control activities which are to be carried out from the future should be communicated properly so that employees are able to carry it out properly. And last is something which is monitoring, just viewing whether the things are going on properly or not, and if there are any changes required, they could be changed, modifications could be made for the improvement of the entire process. Okay, so there are 8 steps in case of enterprise risk management, and we have only these many things. As in enterprise risk management, you need to know the definition, you need to know the benefits, you need to know the components, if you're understanding. So these are the 8 points which you need to study in case of enterprise risk management if you're paying attention. So enterprise risk management is completed. So before we move ahead and try to complete something known as internal control, why don't you come on to page number 5 and let us try to underline some content so that you have the summary with you, and then only we move ahead. Now this is how, you know, the summary of the point which was ERM components look like. Okay, so you could make it more descriptive. More descriptive is to be made. The more descriptive you make, the more are the chances of getting more marks. So your notebook should have the right amount of more description, and we don't need to, you know, decorate it like this. Depends on you completely, because time is more important. Now you come on to page number 5. You see risks. Risks definition we would be underlining. Risks is any event that may result in a significant deviation from a planned objective, resulting in an unwanted negative consequence. Okay, this is the definition. Then we have something which is known as risks of BPA, business process automation. And now in order to remember this, you could just write over here in capital iPod, IPOD, in capital file structure, iPod file structure. If you have written it well and good, iPod file structure. What could be the risks in BPA? iPod file structure. So that means BPA has one more topic. One is known as objective, next is known as benefits, then we have implementation of BPA, and then we also have something known as risks. So actually this is like under a topic, under another topic which is known as risk, but still there are like 1, 2, 3, 4 topics of BPA: objectives, benefits, implementation, and risks. Okay, so input, iPod file structure, input and access. All input transaction data may not be accurate, complete, and authorized. Data transmission may not be processed accurately and completely due to network error. More important for us is the network error. Processing may not have been processed or accurately and completely due to program error. Error is also known as bug. So error or bugs is like plural. Output is distributed to unauthorized personnel due to weak access control. Data, master data and transaction data may be changed by unauthorized personnel due to weak access control. Infrastructure, all data and program could be lost if there is no proper backup in the event of disaster. Till disaster you would be underlining. Then we have something known as types of business risks. Here you could underline, you could write strategy for reputation, or you could write strategy for regulation. It depends on you. One word would be strategy. Next we have capital FOR. Then we have reputation. This is something which you need to write. Strategy for reputation. Strategy for reputation. Strategy for reputation. Now, strategy for strategic risks that would prevent an organization from accomplishing its objectives. Financial risks that could result in negative financial impact to the organization. Regulatory risks that could expose the organization to fines and penalties due to non-compliance with laws and regulations. Reputational risks that would expose the organization to negative publicity. Operational risks that could prevent the organization from operating in most effective and efficient manner. Strategy for reputation is something through which you are going to remember the business risks. So, or you could write strategy for regulation. There are two R's. One could be regulation, one could be reputation. Next, we have something known as enterprise risk management. Enterprise risk management, there are 5 points actually inside this. May be defined as process affected by entities, board of directors, management, and other personnel. This is the first thing. Second, you can write in points, okay? Applied, where applied in strategy setting and across the enterprise. Second, underline and number 2. Third, designed to identify potential events that may affect the entity. Potential events, important word number 3. Okay, so first one was entities BODs, which could be an important word. Second, strategy setting, which could be an important word. Third, potential events, important word. Fourth, and manage risk to be within its risk appetite. Risk appetite could be an important word. To provide assurance regarding achievement of entity objectives. So objectives, fifth important term. So BOD, strategy setting, potential events, risk appetite, and objectives. This is the definition of ERM. Now there are 5 benefits of ERM which you need to remember. Just give the heading as benefits of ERM, and you could write this in the 5 points. Seize multiple surprises to enhance the strategy. 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 You would be writing it above benefits. Seize multiple strategy. Seize multiple surprises to enhance the strategy. Seize multiple surprises to enhance the strategy. Now, first one was align risk appetite and strategy. Risk appetite is the degree of risk on the broad based level that an enterprise is willing to accept. So this is the definition of risk appetite which is there in the syllabus. Okay. Management considers the entity's risk appetite first in evaluating strategic alternatives. To manage the related risks. To manage the related risks. So till alternatives, and then you directly come on to manage the related risks. Then second one, enhanced risk response. ARM provides the rigor to identify and select among alternative risk responses. Rigor, you can write a mechanism. Okay, a mechanism. Rigor means mechanism to identify and select among alternative risk, avoidance, reduction, sharing, and acceptance. So these are the these four responses are important. Minimize operational surprises and losses. Entities have capability of identifying potential events, thereby reducing the occurrence of surprises and related costs, thereby reducing the occurrence of surprises and losses. Surprises and losses. So till potential events, and then from thereby till surprises and losses. Provide integrated response to multiple risks. ERM enables integrated solutions for managing the risks. Seize opportunities. Management gains an understanding of how certain events represent opportunities. Okay, then you come on to components of ERM. ERM consists of 8 interrelated components. First, internal environment. The internal environment encompasses the tone of the organization and sets the basis of how risk is viewed and addressed by entities, people. Till here. Then you have objective setting. Objectives should be set before management can identify events potentially affecting the achievement. Now, just underline this. There are some words which are like, stuck to each other. Just try to underline this. ARM ensures, okay, this much. Then just make this align as alignment of entities. Just make this align with as alignment of entities, mission and mission slash vision, entities mission slash vision, entities mission slash vision with entities risk appetite. So ERM ensures alignment of entities mission slash vision with entities risk appetite. Then we have something known as event identification. Potential events that might have an impact should be identified till here. Event identification includes identifying internal and external. Okay, it includes distinguishing between potential events that represent risk and those representing opportunities. Opportunities are channeled back to the management strategy or objective setting process. Fourth point, risk assessment. Identified risks are analyzed to form a basis for determining how they should be managed. Risks are associated with objectives that may till managed, and then risks are assessed on both an inherent and residual basis, and the assessment considers both risk, likelihood and impact. These are the four important words. So after risk assessment, we have something known as risk response. Management seeks an approach, set of action and analyze, assess risk with the entity's risk tolerance and risk appetite. Till here. Personnel identify and evaluate possible responses to risks, including avoiding, accepting, reducing and sharing. So important for us is align assessed risks with entities risk tolerance and appetite, and these four responses. But you would be underlining this entire thing: personnel, identify and evaluate. Control activities. Policies and procedures are established and executed to help ensure that risk response management are selected are effectively carried out. Information and communication. Relevant information is identified, captured and communicated in a form to carry out the responsibilities. Okay. Capturing to carry out the responsibilities. Effective communication should also occur in a broader sense, flowing down, across and up the entity. So it should flow in all the direction. That is what it says. Personnel need to receive clear communication regarding their roles and responsibilities. Last, the entire ERM monitoring. The entire ERM should be monitored and modifications made as necessary. In this way, the system can react dynamically, changing as conditions warrant. As new changes come up, we could change the control system as well, okay, by the monitoring process which is there for bringing changes. So these are the 8 points in case of components of ERM. Thank you.